It's February the 6th, 2013. This is 508, a show about Worcester. Today on the show is Scott Schaeffer-Duffy. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Mike.
And Robert Peters. Hello, Robert. How are you doing? And hopefully other people will be on the show today. I am Michael Benedetti. Today on the show, oh man, where's my notes? Here we go. We're going to talk about potentially some police stuff. We're going to talk a ton about panhandling. We're going to talk about the fast pace of things downtown. We're going to talk about this, that, and the other thing. This is a weekly show where we talk about issues in the city of Worcester. Hopefully no more boring than it has to be. Hopefully not that condescending. We haven't talked about panhandling for a couple of shows, and this has been a huge obsession of this program. A couple of weeks ago, the City Council did the finalization of passing a set of ordinances to crack down on panhandling. This is the third anti-panhandling campaign by the City of Worcester in recent years. The first one was a total failure. The second one seemed like a partial success, but then was sort of slightly abandoned, it seems like. And the third one involves passing laws to restrict asking for help, soliciting donations, anything like that in public roadways, in traffic medians, also saying that you can't do them in a hostile or aggressive way, like you can't repeatedly ask somebody for something, and also actually restricting time and place, such as you can't do this at night, you can't ask Scott, you can't ask anyone for help in the city of Worcester at night in a public place, nor can you do that near a bus stop or a payphone or many other locations. I have a lot of procedural hang-ups around this, of course, but I want to talk to you guys about non-procedural hang-ups. You're going to do some stuff around this for Ash Wednesday, which is next Wednesday, the 13th. Is that right?
Yes.
So what are you going to do, and what's your guys' objection to this panhandling stuff?
Well, I mean, there's two layers of objection. One is a strictly secular objection. We shelter the homeless.
Okay.
And we've been doing it for years.
We should point out that you guys are members of the Catholic Worker Movement.
Right.
And we are right now inside the St. Francis and Therese Catholic Worker House.
Right. And as people that shelter the homeless, we have a sense of how the economy is going. And the economy is probably in the worst shape it's been in the 28 years that I've done this work. And people are finding it very, very difficult to find employment. When they find employment, oftentimes it's not a living wage. Mm-hmm. Housing, affordable housing is very difficult to get. There's long waiting lists. More and more programs have long waiting lists. And meanwhile, city budgets are shrinking. And as the city budgets shrink, they are cutting back services. And the city of Worcester has, for example, introduced a policy in the city shelter. You have to prove 2 years residency to be able to qualify. And on one level, I'm sympathetic to the city because surrounding towns that are well-to-do send people in need to Worcester, and Worcester bears the services, bears the brunt. But unfortunately, by restricting that, it didn't exactly prompt Northborough and Westborough and Holden to open shelters.
Yeah.
So the people are just coming to us saying, we have nowhere to go. We have nowhere to sleep. And when I first started doing this work in Washington, D.C., the first winter I was there, 13 people froze to death. Mm-hmm. So I was...
Brendan Melican is walking in. Scott's like shooting his eyes sideways.
Okay.
So
I was aware that this is something that can happen. And I didn't want to see this happen in Worcester. And in the context of the shrinking government budgets and the tightening economy, I started to notice more and more people at street corners appealing for help. Mm-hmm. And I know that, even though some of these people may not be doing it for this reason, I know many of these people are desperate because of those two phenomena happening at the same time: fewer opportunities and fewer services. And it seems to me to be outrageous for the city that's offering less services than to say, well, not only will we not help you, we will deny the general public the free chance to help you out of their own accord.
Right, and we should point out, nobody would be panhandling in Worcester or soliciting donations in Worcester if the people of Worcester were not super generous and wanted to give people money.
And that segues into the second reason. Now, on a religious level, and I think even in just a human level, I think people understand giving to those in need. In India, they get good karma. They say, that it's a good thing. That helping those in need is a decent human thing to do. And all the major world religions talk about it, about the value of that, of giving to them. And most of them talk about it not as charity, as some condescending thing, but a sense of things are given to us who have it in stewardship, to give in justice to those who don't have it. This is about a correction of an imbalance. But also, in most religious traditions, there is a sense, too, that when one is in need, it's actually meritorious to beg. It reminds us, it humbles us on one level, but it also reminds us of a deep spiritual reality, is that regardless of how we get the things we need to live, whether it's through work or through asking for it, all of it is ultimately a gratuitous gift. The person that works 40 hours and makes $200,000 thinks it's all from them, but did they create the air, the sun, the water? All of these things are still coming. Everything is a gift from God. And so the beggar is someone who reaches the consciousness that we are all really beggars. We are all really dependent on each other. And human community cannot exist, and secular people recognize this too. Hillary Clinton, where takes a village, this sort of thing. So for these two different reasons, we oppose these regulations, and we think the particular regulations in Worcester are designed around trying to avoid First Amendment court challenges, but also they're designed around trying to make begging for money so difficult, so cumbersome, that just like the regulation, you have to prove residency, that Worcester will get a reputation. This is a hostile place for the poor. Mm-hmm. The way San Diego had in the 80s. They used to poison dumpsters there to keep people from eating out of dumpsters. Mm. And they used to throw people in jail. As Mayor Sam Yorty, there was a sense, you go there, we're going to arrest you for being poor. And that Worcester can get this kind of hostile reputation that will keep people somehow who are on some kind of grapevine mm-hmm. not to come to Worcester, which is, of course, silly, because people come to Worcester because they have a relative here, thought there was a job here, they grew up here. They're not testing the waters to see what the homeless services are before they come to Worcester. And many of those who come who end up in need, the misfortune happens after they arrived. Something that they couldn't have, foreseen, a fire, an illness, getting laid off. More and more, this is a problem. People with multiple degrees laid off can't find work. And if they find it, it's at a Walmart for $88 a week or so, and they can't afford, to live. So
what are you going to do about this, Scott?
Well, we know that a number of people have raised this. Dave Macheski in our community and Robert went to some of the city council meetings, and people have spoken. You yourself, I know, have spoken about this.
David Coyne spoke about this from Jewish perspective.
That's
also.
That's right. And he's got a good labor history, and he spoke about it. And we're going to go on Ash Wednesday down to a place we hold our regular peace vigil on Tuesdays at Lincoln Square, and Robert Peters is starting to make these signs that show the religious tradition of, Jesus, Gandhi, Buddha. There'll be one of Mother Teresa, that to remind people that great religious leaders, begged. And as our leaflet will say, which we're going to distribute that way, in the Muslim tradition, giving to beggars, and Christians say the same thing too, is important because in a spiritual sense, these could be angels. Mm-hmm. This could be a divine test of ours, of, what is and Jesus says in Matthew 25, whatever you do to the least, you do to me. So it's like these folks that are poor on the street corners for us, this is Christ, and we're being judged by how we respond to him. So we're going to go to Lincoln Square. We're going to hold signs like this on one side of the street. Robert's going to wear the clothing that he uses to meditate at the Buddhist temple. And,
are you really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
And just to say that that's not an affectation. He wears it to do his meditation and prayer. That's a regular thing. I'm going to wear a Franciscan habit, and though I'm not a Franciscan, I was a Franciscan novice, and I'm certainly familiar with Francis's teaching on this question, and stand on the median strip, which is a direct violation of this ordinance. And I want to do that not only to challenge the ordinance, but because the ordinance, one of the claims that the city councilors are making is that there's a safety issue involved. Well, I can tell you, as somebody who's given to many a beggar, the ones that are on the median strips, I roll the window down on the driver's side and I give it to them. The ones that are standing where the city councilor tells them, I roll the passenger window down and have to reach across 2 seats, which is actually not as safe.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a it doesn't even make sense in their argument.
And as people have pointed out, of the literally thousands of people who have done some sort of street corner begging in Worcester down through the years, 0 traffic incidents.
Right. This is a solution without a problem.
Right.
Well,
this is a solution to the problem of there are scruffy people on the street corner.
Right. And I think that goes more to the point. They would like to say, improve the reputation of Worcester, not by making Worcester a better place, but making those who make it clear that there are needs in Worcester, making them disappear.
Yeah.
That make it seem like a better place. Wouldn't it be great if the poor just weren't being seen?
So you guys are going to be there in Lincoln Square doing this, and this is right across the street from the main police station in Lincoln Square.
Yes,
right?
and I wrote a letter yesterday to the police chief and to all the members of the city council and the mayor, telling them what we were going to do and making it clear to them, because I say in the letter that we know that the police chief talks about he's going to give people warnings and lists of alternatives, which I'm very interested in, because I got 6 calls today from people who every alternative I suggested to them, they said they had already tried. And
maybe they have a different one on their flyer.
Maybe
you don't know about it.
Maybe they have some crystal ball. But I want to make it clear that he doesn't need to give us a warning. I understand the regulation. This is a direct and deliberate disobedience of that regulation.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, you've done plenty of civil disobedience down through the years. Do you think is anybody getting arrested for this? People are just going to get a ticket for this?
The sad fact is, I think would be extraordinary for them to appear and to give me a ticket for this.
And this is because you're not legitimately a scruffy man on the street corner.
All
they care about is actual scruffy people.
I think, were we doing this not as a media event, not as in a public way like this, were we just going to the Chandler Street and had a sign, give to the Catholic worker, and did that for 2 weeks in a row, every day to raise money for the Catholic worker, I don't think we'd be prosecuted for that either. And this goes back to the back in the day where they raised a stink in the city on the Food Not Bombs people on the Common. They said they didn't have a permit, and they were going after them for giving out food to the poor. Now, that was when they were really touting the mall as a big destination location, and they didn't want the poor on the Common. So we wrote a public statement saying, well, we've been sheltering the homeless here on Mason Street without any kind of permits for 20 years. And the police sent 3 people to our house this week. They didn't come and arrest us. They forwarded guests to us. So the point then is the same point now. It's not about stopping people from begging. In fact, if they could have found a way to keep the Little League teams in business, they would have done it. It's about the scruffy, the people of color, the disabled. It's people with one leg, like the man across the street from the World War, Vietnam vets and so on. These are what they want to get rid of.
I want to ask you guys a question. It's been a couple minutes on this. Then I want to give Brendan a chance to ask a question. Then I want to run down all the procedural mess around this real quick. So here's my one concern, and we only have a few minutes to talk about this. Here's the gospel for Ash Wednesday. I love this gospel. Jesus said to his disciples, "Take care not to perform righteous deeds in order that people may see them. Otherwise, you will have no recompense from your heavenly Father. When you give alms, do not blow a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets to win the praises of others. Amen, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right is doing, so that your almsgiving may be secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on street corners so that others may see them." It goes on in this vein.
Well, as Robert
Your response to Jesus, Scott.
Well, as Robert said earlier, that's a great text, but it is all about the intention. Do not do this for this reason. Do not do this for this reason. And intent is very important. And this action that we're doing is really on behalf of these people whom we know are suffering. And some of these people may die if the weather becomes bad and there's no resource for them, and they're told they can't go into the library. The library changed its whole architecture a few years ago to take out chairs that homeless people used to sleep in. That if this kind of change continues, so this is on behalf of these other people. This is really the focus of this thing. and what happens to us is of little consequence, and frankly, most of what will happen to us is similar to previous peace things we've done. There'll be 3 times as much criticism as support.
Right. You're right. 10% of the people who hear about this are going to say, "Oh, that's Scott and Robert. They're such holy men," and 90% of people are going to say, "Those knuckleheads."
Yes.
What do they think they're doing?
Yes, and and that's. But even with those people, if they start to talk about the question of panhandling, and they may say something quite negative about it, and then maybe somebody else will say, but think about that. Jesus, was a mendicant.
Yes.
And St. Francis was a mendicant, and maybe, just maybe, some of the hundreds of clergy in the city, one of them will pick it up and talk about this and say, look, this is a season of Lent. We're supposed to be giving to the poor, or in the Jewish tradition, we're supposed to be, distributing, and the discussion may be advanced. And if it's advanced with a few more people, then it's worth it for the criticism, the ridicule, and whatever you get from the others.
I want to point out 2 things. First of all, I want to point out that there's actually going to be a live show at the Pickle Barrel February 7th at 6 p.m. Mike Andrioli is doing this. Matt Crancy is organizing this. People should go down and check this out. If you see this online rather than on television, you get a chance to see that. The other thing is that there's, of course, a huge prophetic tradition in the Judeo-Christian tradition that, like the gospel on Ash Wednesday says, don't make a big deal like this. But the first reading is from the prophet Joel, saying, "Even now, says the Lord, return to me with your whole heart, with fasting, weeping, and mourning." So it's not like there's not, again, a great tradition of people running down the street saying...
But unfortunately, I just read a quote yesterday from Phil Berrigan.
Yeah.
It said, "The poor tell us who we are, the prophets tell us whom we should be, and that's why the governments hide the poor and kill the prophets."
Yeah.
So it's the combination. Prophets were never really popular with their governments for pointing out their errors.
I'm gonna hurry this.
And many of them took it on the chin for it. So that association, we certainly we're not trying to put ourselves at that level. This is not quite that brave, that courageous, or even that consistent as the prophets. Some of them just never let it go. And we hope that we can continue to raise this issue in other ways and join with other people until the city abandons these particular ordinances.
Brendan Melican.
There's really nothing I could say that would add anything to what the sentiment Scott is thrown out there. I mean, I spoke to just about every counselor that I could get my hands on as this was bubbling up, and it was such nonsense that was just coming out of folks' mouths in terms of rationale. I fell back, and I know I've said this to you before, Mike. I mean, I tend to try and view most of the world as a parent through my 8-year-old son's eyes. And going back to since he was around 5, whether we were walking, driving, whatever, he would always point out to me somebody who was panhandling and be very, very angry and agitated if I didn't stop and give them something. And it just always struck me that, and you mentioned these truths even coming from a secular perspective, it just seems something so obvious that if a 5-year-old child can understand that if somebody needs something and they have the wherewithal to ask, that you should at least make an effort to respond to that ask. And it just beside myself with the notion that our elected officials can't grasp that. It just seems like too simple a concept for anyone in a leadership position to kind of gloss over.
I want to complain about the procedural part of this for a couple minutes, and then we'll wrap this show up. So, of course, when the subcommittee discussing these regulations met, several people stood up before them at the beginning and said, "We're really concerned about the fact that there's traffic safety stuff and there's stuff about aggressive behavior. Maybe some of that's reasonable, maybe some of that's not. There's also a lot of crazy restrictions, like you can't ask for help in Worcester near a bus stop. You can't ask for help in Worcester near a payphone. You can't ask for help in Worcester after sundown or before dawn." And none of the people on that subcommittee or the city solicitor talked about it during that meeting. And after the meeting, we went to one of the counselors and we said, "Why didn't you talk to that when multiple people brought that up specifically? You didn't even acknowledge it." And he said, "Well, it's not in there." And we said, "No, it is. Pull the copy out of your pocket. We'll show you." And he looked at it and he was stunned. He was like, "Oh, I guess I hadn't seen that part." So at least one of the people we confirmed who voted for it in the subcommittee had not read it before voting for it. At the city council, when they voted for it, people stood up and spoke about a lot of stuff. I went up there and I said the section of the thing that was a concern. None of them talked about it. Rick Rushton said this doesn't affect anyone on a sidewalk, which is completely wrong because, again, on a half the time at night it affects everyone on a sidewalk. During the day it affects people in thousands of locations in Worcester on the sidewalk. I don't think he read it. None of the city councilors or the city solicitor during that conversation discussed these parts. The Telegram and Gazette and Worcester Magazine, up until that meeting, didn't mention any of those controversial parts about time and place restrictions. It wasn't until, the city council basically had to vote for it and then 2 weeks later vote for it again. The morning of the second vote on it, the Telegram and Gazette did mention these parts in their article. So, you get a D- rather than an F on your coverage, but I think it's really misleading coverage. So this is amazing to me that I don't know how many of the city councilors read this. I know that some of them did not read this before voting for it. And I got to say, it's a hard job to be a city councilor. It takes a lot of time. But if it's too much of, if there's legislation that you can't read before voting for it, just say, we got to crank things down, guys. We got to vote for less stuff. We got to just not handle this right now because we don't have the bandwidth. The implementation of this has been a mess. They've been handing papers out to the people on the streets saying what you can and cannot do. They mostly have been talking about only the traffic restrictions, not the time and the place restrictions or the aggressive behavior restrictions. One of the papers that they've been handing out says, Safe Streets, Smart Giving. This is the city's paper. Offering money to someone standing on a roadway or on a median puts them and other drivers directly in danger. Again, we've talked about factually. Common sense is true, statistically not true. To ensure pedestrian safety, this activity is prohibited at or in the following areas: roadways, rotaries, and traffic medians and islands. Wait, offering money is prohibited according to this. No, it's not. It has nothing about offering money being prohibited in this ordinance. So this paper is 100% wrong. And later it goes on to say the ordinance does not restrict people's right to free speech, does not target one group of people, does not target one activity. To quote the Big Lebowski, I would say, that's just your opinion, man. The ACLU is going to sue your ass because you are restricting people's right to free speech. And again, statistically, they're probably going to win.
But that's actually an important distinction. I think it's something that a lot of people miss when it comes to bureaucracy, is that when a lawmaker's job is to create a law, a statute, or whatnot that's going to hit up books. It's a bureaucrat's job then to interpret that regulation
and to make
create a set of regulations that marry up with it. So most everyone is familiar with the Mass General Law, the MGL. Mm-hmm. Most people aren't familiar with the CMR, which is actually the way each individual state agency interprets their section of the MGL, and then creates a set of regulations to follow that. That sounds like the city of Worcester has now created a set of regulations that, based on its interpretation of its own ordinance, which in a way is kind of genius, because if someone was to file a lawsuit, now they're actually going to be filing a lawsuit based on a regulation. You're not actually going to be filing a lawsuit against a statute or an ordinance, even though that's the thing you want to strike down.
I want to ask you about this.
So the city would then have a weird sort of defense that it could make that, well, what the court is asking us to do is change our regulations as opposed to changing the ordinance, which is the catalyst for the problem as a whole.
Because this is my question, because I think that I actually kind of feel like these flyers are genius in that what the city council passed is one thing, and what the city council is telling people the law is, and potentially telling the police the law is a totally different thing.
Or what the law department
and
is telling people based on
is that kind of a genius way to get around this, or you're saying just open them up to more lawsuits or fewer lawsuits?
No, I think what it does is sort of, in a way, it kind of insulates the ordinance itself from legal action, and instead puts the burden of any potential legal action on a regulation.
Okay.
Again, our ordinances aren't really the thing that we work with. It's each department's regulations that are based on an internal interpretation or a legal interpretation of the ordinance, which is where you end up with these multiple layers of bureaucracy that make it very difficult for anyone to navigate through.
Well, given this though, we're specifically challenging a part of the ordinance by being on the island,
which is not part of that.
And we'll make it clear if anyone gives to us that they may be violating the regulations by giving to us as well.
There in the island.
They're co-conspirators. Me by begging and them by giving.
Right.
And we're all breathing the same cloud of.
No, and I don't need to give the city any more credit as due by referring to it as genius, but just in the sense that there are so many layers that an individual would have to work through to get to the heart of the problem in this case, which is an ordinance that was poorly thought out, obviously. Those multiple layers just create more and more hurdles to work through, and really, in a way, buy the city a lot of time to do what it wants to do without having to have any fear of any sort of direct legal action, which is, even when the SJC case, it goes back to Cambridge, 20 years ago, that took a lot of time to actually get to the point where the state Supreme Court was going to hear a case and actually make a decision based on Cambridge's ordinance.
We got to wrap this up, don't we?
We do.
Can we let Robert speak for 30 seconds?
Yes,
because otherwise you're going to take the Dave Machewski job of being on the show and not talking. Robert, Hi. You did a good job with these signs. I know
Yeah.
you're a very talkative and thoughtful person. I'm sorry we haven't talked to you.
Am I?
Do you have a brief comment for the press here?
Well, you had asked me earlier about that scriptural text
Yes,
from Lent.
yes.
Yeah. As you know, that's taken from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. That particular one is from Matthew chapter 6.
Oh man, it totally is.
Well, because I've memorized the entire sermon, I say it to myself once a day.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And so if you look in chapter 5 of Jesus' sermon,
Mm-hmm.
yes, when he says that, when he speaks to those who've chosen to be his disciples, he says, you are the salt of the earth. Then he says, you are the light of the world. Okay, this has to do with our effect in the world.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that segment, he says, so let your good works so shine before men,
Mm-hmm.
so that they may see your good works
Mm-hmm.
and give glory to your Father, which is in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the one hand, in chapter 5, he says, let them see your good works, so that God can receive glory. On the other hand, in chapter 6, he says, be careful that you do not do your good works in front of people. Why? To be seen of them, to receive glory for yourself, he says,
Mm-hmm.
to simply to be seen from them, or to receive some sort of advantage for yourself for
Mm-hmm.
doing it. So you have to be very careful when you take one scriptural text out of context and not put it in the bigger picture. Obviously, if we were not allowed to do our good works in front of people, none, for instance, prayer or fasting or giving alms, well, none of us would be meeting together on Sundays for church, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
None of us would be meeting together for prayer. We'd have to find a closet, which, by the way, I used to do as a teenager, taking him quite literally, which was a little dangerous when I was lighting candles in a closet. But anyway, I came out of the closet, and sort of figuratively speaking. And anyway, and so anyway, you do have to take Jesus in context. So I could, if I had a broader venue, I could point to many things in his Sermon on the Mount, and then go directly to the same gospel and show where he seemingly seemed to break every one of the things that he said we shouldn't be doing. So what is important is the motive behind what we're doing. Why are we doing it? Is it a good work? We have to ask ourselves, is our going to Lincoln Square to protest this ordinance, which in my opinion is against the poor, and is it a good work that we're doing to draw attention to this potential injustice?
I think it is.
And it is. And does it bring glory to God? Well,
Maybe not.
what does the glory of God mean?
Robert, we got to wrap it up.
When
Thanks
God,
for being on the show.
You're okay. You're welcome.
It's a 30-minute show. I'm Michael Benedetti, Brendan Melican,
Thanks,
Scott
sir.
Schaeffer-Duffy. Talk to you all next week. Bye-bye, guys.